And good day, everyone. Richard Cowperthwait from Northwest Access TV. Thank you for joining us today. And we've got our first of our pre-election shows today. We're taping this show on Tuesday, October 1st. Happy October to everyone out there. Election day, 5 weeks from today. And very happy to have two candidates for the Franklin-3 House District. To my left, Joe Luneau, the Republican. To my right, the incumbent, Mike McCarthy, the Democrat. Appreciate you folks joining us. Just a quick word, not to bore you with my situation, but folks might be wondering what my story is with my bandages. And just very quickly to say, just dealing with a bit of a skin cancer issue. I don't think anything too serious, but just wanted to say for what it's worth, might be worth for folks out there who have never dealt with a dermatologist. Might not be a bad idea to visit a dermatologist sometime and make sure you're okay. Anyway, on with the show. Again, candidates in the Franklin-3 House District, and we've got two other shows coming up. And again, pretty quiet election in Franklin County and statewide. 3 contests in Franklin County and statewide, nothing like 2 years ago when there was kind of a lot more excitement. But again, this is a big race. This may well be the marquee race in Franklin County. And we'll start with Joe Luneau. Joe, a rematch with you and Mike. Two years ago, and initially it sounds like you were hoping someone else would jump in as a Republican challenger.
Yes. It appeared as though there was going to be another individual running in Franklin-3, and that just didn't come to pass at the 11th hour. So as a result of that, I waged a successful write-in campaign on primary day, and here I am.
And you got plenty of write-in votes. How many write-in votes did you get?
I've seen a couple different numbers, but somewhere in the 170s.
Really? And you needed, what, 50?
I needed 50.
Is that up from 30? It used to be 30, and that's up to 50 now? Is that the case?
Yeah, the number has been increased, yes.
Anyway, but you got plenty, so.
Yeah, and there were, I needed 50 on the Republican side. There were 140 some odd, and there were a couple dozen or so on the Democratic side.
So back for a rematch. Give us some background on yourself.
Well, I'm a St. Albans guy. I went to St. Albans City School, Bella's Free Academy, St. Albans, and went to college at Boston College. And I've been home, worked at what is now Handy Toyota. It's a family business since I got out of school. I've been involved with the St. Albans City Council. Was a council president representing Ward 5 at one time. I'm currently the president of the St. Albans Museum and chair of the St. Albans City Board of Civil Authority. So that's some things in my background. This year, some very real issues are affordability, primarily the unprecedented increase we saw in the property taxes here. And I really believe, and the governor believes, that didn't need to be. That didn't need to be. In St. Albans City, we saw a 15.5% increase this year alone. And that's just a huge concern for residents in St. Albans City.
And we'll get into these issues. Later.
Certainly.
That's certainly one of the biggies.
I'm sorry if I got out of form there.
Okay, we're easy. That's fine. Mike, veteran lawmaker at this point, but give us some background.
Yeah, I moved up to Vermont with my family when I was a little kid and grew up in Franklin County. I went to St. Michael's College, and I got a degree in biochemistry with a minor in political science. I've probably used the poli-sci minor more than the biochem major. I was a downtown business owner. One of the reasons I came back after college and settled in St. Albans and chose the downtown as my home is even though at the time, back in 2008, you might remember a lot of the storefronts were empty, things were a little tough. It was a place where, it seemed like it had good bones, and I just loved the community. It was where I had grown up, and so I wanted to invest with my brother and my mom in a small business. So we ran Cosmic Bakery and Cafe for a few years in the downtown and got to be there while the revitalization was happening. I got involved in local politics during that time. I volunteered, served as chair of the downtown board, eventually ran for the House and won. I've now served 4 terms in the House and 2 terms on the city council. And, during that time, especially in the last few years, have been doing a lot of work on public safety. So that's an issue I hope that we'll talk about later.
You can count on that. So again, running for a fifth term.
Yes.
And in fact, are you in the Democratic leadership in the House these days?
Yeah, so the biennium before this one that we're currently finishing up, I was the assistant majority leader, so I served as the whip. So I was able to serve on the Rules Committee and work with folks from the Senate and the other parties in the House on, how do we run business? It was also my job to, help guide what the Democratic governing majority's goals were going to be and, kind of have a Franklin County perspective on that. I really didn't enjoy that as much as I did doing policy work. So this year, I had the privilege for the last 2 years to have been appointed chair of the House Government Operations and Military Affairs Committee. GovOps is a great place because you end up getting to touch on the Office of Professional Regulation. How do we license everything from cosmetologists to mental health professionals and make sure that the work that they're doing is safe for the public? You get to work on elections policy. But the biggest thing there, and the responsibility that I think is pertinent now, is the administration, the training that we do with public safety, and how we support our court system. And we've made great strides to deal with some of the case backlog and other issues that were plaguing us coming out of the pandemic. And I have a lot to talk about in terms of things that we're now seeing because of the work that we did in the last 2 years, finally roll out over the summer and fall to deal with some of the issues that I'm hearing about here locally.
Just picking up something on radio news this morning, thought about another role you had as vice chairman of the, excuse my voice, impeachment committee. I'm not using the correct name for that, but I'm just mentioning that today because John Grismore, the Franklin County Sheriff, I guess they're picking a jury today, or maybe picked it yesterday, but again, being tried again for the second time on a simple assault charge, misdemeanor charge, hung jury the first time. Some folks said, why is Doug DeSabato, the Grand Isle County prosecutor, bringing this back again? Good decision to try the sheriff again?
I don't feel like it's my place to weigh in on the criminal case. What we found...
You were certainly very vocal about John Grismore, and I mean, certainly asked him to resign. You really pressed him to resign unsuccessfully, obviously.
Yeah, and I think, this is one thing that 2 years ago, Joe and I were very aligned on, right?
Yeah, sounds like you were. Sounds like it.
Once the video was released, just having confidence in law enforcement is really important.
Okay.
And the special committee on impeachment inquiry, our job was to investigate whether it made sense to offer articles of impeachment, both with the case of the sheriff, John Grismore, because there were both concerns about the use of force incident, but what I think people know less about is some of the financial mismanagement that was going on in that office.
Is that still being looked at? I've heard so little about that. I heard state police were investigating that, and I've seen almost nothing. Is that still going on? Do you know?
My understanding is that it's still under investigation, and forensic accounting is a really complicated and tedious way to investigate crime. What we found were some things that were really concerning, like the payment directly of funds that should have gone into state retirement accounts by Mr. Grismore when he was the captain. Before he became the sheriff, he was managing payroll, he was managing the books, and instead of putting money into the state retirement funds, even after being told by the retirement division that money needed to go into the retirement funds, he cut checks to himself in those amounts.
And I don't really want to get into the detail. For the record, I've interviewed the sheriff a number of times, and he denies any wrongdoing about that. But in just about the trial, so no comment about.
No, I think the court systems and our criminal justice system needs to play itself out, and I don't want to put my thumb on the scale as a politician on that.
That's fine. Joe, your thoughts on the second trial for the Sheriff Grismore that's about to start in Grand Isle County? Good idea for the prosecutor to come back with that again?
Not sure. That's the prosecutor's discretion, but specifically, Richard, I've heard exactly 0 people in Franklin-3 talk about that when I'm going to doors.
Yeah. Of course, the sheriff won election, again, albeit against 2 write-in candidates, but won election pretty easily.
He did, and certainly, I was involved in supporting a write-in for Mark Lauer.
Yeah.
I think a distinction between myself and Mike is that I let it go after the voters spoke. We had an impeachment that wasn't privy to anyone, and there were no charges brought. And subsequently, there was a bill that was passed that specifically reduced Sheriff Grismore's pay, and I don't think that was necessarily proper course of action.
Okay, let's move on beyond the sheriff. You touched on affordability. I was going to ask you, biggest concerns of voters as you campaign, is affordability top of the list, or one of them obviously, or?
That is the top of the list, and affordability comes in many flavors. But the primary thing is this 15.5% property tax increase. It's completely avoidable. It's unsustainable. It doesn't bring our residents to the breaking point. I think it really brings them past that. And it does all sorts of other things. It reduces the taxing capacity of municipalities and select boards and city councils to do the things that they need to do that are right for their communities, because Montpelier's already taken the bandwidth away from the monies that are available from the taxpayers.
Again, I hear certainly plenty of criticism by Republicans, yourself, of the Democratic supermajority in the legislature. I hear plenty of criticism, and I'm sure there is plenty of criticism. Solutions, have you got good solutions? Any magical solutions? It just seems like taxes have become a huge issue in Vermont. Is there any hope down the line?
Well, they are. So by any metric, we are, one of the top 3 most taxed states in the country. And you can see various numbers that'll move our ranking around one spot or another. But the bottom line is we pay more as Vermonters to our state government than most other states do as a percentage of our income. So this year, the governor's office and the governor presented multiple options which could have gotten the property tax for residential and non-residential rates to around a 5% increase, which I think would be a lot more amenable to residents than this 15.5% that we're seeing here in St. Albans City. Those solutions were rejected wholesale by the supermajority. And so that speaks to putting out the fire this year. Going forward, there need to be fundamental changes in how we address education funding in a way that respects all the stakeholders involved. The residents, the taxpayers, educators, and of course the product we're delivering to our children in Vermont schools.
Stop you there, Mike. As a card-carrying member of the aforementioned Democratic supermajority, again, I can only assume you're running. Well, you're hearing some criticism now, but you're running into more criticism about just property tax issue than you did in the past, or you tell me? You guys are certainly getting plenty of criticism.
Yeah, I've been very upfront about the challenges that are facing our public education system, the reasons that I have been really working on bills like H850 and 887, which took a look at the extreme pressures that our districts were seeing. I want to ask people to take a look at the history of how education works and the role of the legislature and what we're doing right now in the legislature to change that. Decisions about which buildings, how much staff, curriculum, all of those things that really drive the biggest dollar amounts for school costs, those are really made at the local level. We have 119 school districts in Vermont right now. And what happens is that each year, that process starts in the summer. And then by December, the tax commissioner puts out a letter and says, hey, if we just do this on the property tax alone, this is the percentage increase that we would need to see, most likely. So there's a model that gets released on December 1st by the tax commissioner.
And indeed, the early line was, 18-20%, which ended up being a little lower, but not drastically lower.
Well, and actually, by the time we got the budgets fully warned a couple months later in January and February, it was much, much worse. And in communities like ours in St. Albans City that have a nearly 20-year-old assessment, so, a house that is assessed at $200,000 would probably sell for $375,000. That means we have what's called a 64% common level of appraisal. And all that's to say that our tax rate increase has to go up higher than the average in order for us to pay the same dollar amount on the back end. And what I want to do is make sure that we are talking about the solutions that we need to actually bring down costs, and that the voters are looking at the people who can bring people from 150 different communities, many of which want to hang on to school choice that sends high tuition dollars to private schools. They want to hang on to buildings that used to have 150 kids and only have 10 kids per grade now. It will be very hard to have the legislature in 1 year, when we see healthcare costs rising 16% like they did last year, to just go with a blanket kneecap to districts and say, we're just cutting your funding and you got to figure it out. That's not a practical way for us to fix the education problem.
So is there realistic hope that you can turn the situation around?
There is. There's a couple of different things that we can do. So one thing is that we've created this Commission on the Future of Public Education to actually look at the many studies that have been done and make recommendations to the legislature for how we're going to specifically do this in each district. I think about districts like ours. So what if, with our 3 elementary schools that we have, what if the state legislature just came in and said, you're going to have to close Fairfield School, or you're going to have to put all the kids from city and town school together in a pre-K to 4 and a 5 to 8 and split the buildings? If the legislature said that top down, I think people in this community would be very frustrated if we did that top down from the legislature. So what we're going to do is look at setting target class sizes. We've already changed the formula to encourage districts to not overspend by switching to a foundation formula for the next couple of tax years while the commission does it work. And that means that with those excess spending caps, districts that did, like a few districts did, and wanted to spend 20 or 25 or 30% more in 1 year, that they're going to feel that on their local tax rates in a way they never have since Act 60 was passed in 1997. So we've actually already laid the foundation for making sure that this kind of a year doesn't happen again. But I want to tell people that the bottom line with this bill that I have been criticized by my opponent and others on was that it got the lowest property tax increase we could get this year that we could get through the legislature. And it basically dropped the increase for us in the city by about a third. So given our CLA,
But it was still 15.
it was still 15%, and I know that's not sustainable, and that's why we put those foundation formula mechanisms, the commission, why we're looking at target class sizes and other real policy solutions that just could not be done in 1 year. I just want to be really clear with folks that anyone who promises that they can go and fix education in Vermont in 1 year, they better be prepared to say, what are they going to force school districts to do in a reflexive way? And that's the kind of thing that I would want to hear from anybody who's painting a picture that it was possible for us to do this. The one last point I want to make too is that Joe in his earlier comment mentioned that the governor had talked about a variety of different solutions. The governor in his budget address to the legislature said, I've mentioned some things over the years, some of the things I just mentioned, like target class sizes, and you haven't worked with me, so you figure it out. He put this all on the legislature from the jump. And we're a citizen legislature. We work part-time and we listen to our communities. Our communities in large part want to keep the kinds of schools that they have. They don't want Montpelier telling them what to do with their schools. And the governor left the Secretary of Education position vacant for months, did not present a legislative policy proposal to the legislature until April. And in that proposal, all it was the tax commissioner coming in and say, let's borrow money in order to lower property tax rates and dig the hole deeper for next year. The treasurer, my colleagues on the Ways and Means Committee said it was like asking us to take out a payday loan, which we would never be able to dig ourselves out of. It's just fiscally irresponsible. And I know, because I'm feeling the pressure, my neighbors are feeling the pressure, that this tax increase this year is unsustainable. But for the people who can least afford to pay it, we increased the property tax credit on your homestead so that it blunted the impact for people who have low and middle incomes. So
let me flip over to Joe here. Joe, again, Republicans, if you somehow took control of the legislature, which you're not going to do, obviously, could the education financing thing be fixed? Are you saying it could be fixed in a year? Or
Well, again, to begin with, as far as mediation for this past year, to say that we would have needed to borrow money to buy the write-down is just untrue. It's a baseless comment. The governor's proposals it involved doing things like using reserve funds from taxes that were already collected, and various other means, making school meals, need-based instead of universal, which they are now. and also spoke to $4 million in savings that have been achieved by local school boards that were raised, even though those monies have already were not needed in order to fund this year's education. I do agree with Mike that the 15.5% increase is the absolute best for St. Albans City that would have been accepted by the supermajority, and that's what we saw.
And in fact, the school budget, Maple Run School District, the budget was pretty close this year. It's been passed easily in the past. It was a fairly close call this time with the local school budget.
It is, and you know, some autonomy for school districts, of course, is important to Vermonters. But I think that you really need to look at, you know, possibly just a block per student with sensitivity for special needs or what have you, for each school district. And if districts want to spend beyond that, I think that money should be raised locally. The corollary to that is if you look at the district north of us in Swanton, Highgate, and Franklin, I believe they had to get to a third vote. And they cut several $1 million out of their budget, including repaving the driveway, which if you've been to MVU, is deplorable. It's bad. And so they finally got their budget passed, and you would think it'd be logical that those savings stay within those three towns. But that's not how it works. It gets spread throughout the whole state, including high-spending districts, and I don't think that's equitable. Beyond that, it creates a situation where voters don't even understand how their tax rates are created. You know, even here in Maple Run, we have St. Albans Town was in the 13s, St. Albans City was 15.5, and Fairfield was in the low 20s. Yeah. These are three towns that support the same school district. So how does that work?
No, I think everybody would agree it's an incredibly complicated, convoluted education funding formula.
And frankly, I think it's intentional.
Answer that question, maybe?
Do you under? I guess the question is, do you understand that formula?
Yes,
you might be the only person I know who says they do.
I agree it's too complicated for most voters to make sense of. I really do. But the idea that came out of Act 60 in 1997 was that instead of having rich towns that had a lot of big businesses or a ski resort on their grand list that could afford to pay a lot of money for their schools and have great education investments with a low tax rate, and then one or two towns over, you've got towns that, you know, just have some houses and maybe some farms and they don't have as rich a grand list. They have to have poorer schools that don't get to invest as much. And so the state Supreme Court looked at the Vermont Constitution, which we enshrine our values in public education in our state constitution in a way that I don't think any other state does. So it's the state's responsibility to educate all of our kids. And what came out of that decision was this idea that we pull all those property tax dollars for ed together at the state level, and we fund that down at the local level. And that's really benefited communities like ours in a lot of years. This year in particular, though, Joe mentions the different increases by percentage in the rate. If you look at the actual bills and you look at the ways that the different communities assessed values of the properties go, it's the actual dollar amount increases on the back end for comparable properties are more similar. That's what the common level of appraisal does. It just does it in a really blunt way. So we need to have more updated grand lists, and that's part of why I supported a bill last year that'll be fully in effect in about 2 or 3 years as the tax commission works on the proposal to really have all of this appraisal work done for the ed property tax up at the state level.
St. Albans City, for the record, starting a reappraisal as we speak.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at a house in St. Albans City and then compare it to one in Fairfield, that would sell for about the same amount, their assessed values are wildly different, and that's part of what, in order for some fairness from town to town, the state does with the common level of appraisal. So it is complicated, but it's not that we don't understand it. I want to push back on a couple of things.
Just be concise, Mike. I got a lot of.
Oh yeah. One thing I want to say is that if you look at Vermont Digger or any other statewide, and you go and you look at what Craig Bolio said on behalf of the administration in the Ways and Means Committee, the administration did want to borrow money in order to buy down the tax rate this year. We did a lot of the things the governor suggested, like using reserves, and we closed some sales tax exemption loopholes in order to bring this rate down it is just a fact that the administration in the 11th hour proposed borrowing money in order to fund this year's school budgets, and that just would be irresponsible.
So any quick response to Mike's last comments? Do you want to move on?
Well, I mean, just in brief, the governor's proposal did not involve borrowing money. But as far as the common level of appraiser or CLA goes, that it's a parlor game. So it's really immaterial. What you see is your tax bill. So if you could have properties in a community that are assessed for a higher level and have a lower tax rate, okay, but what you can't play games with are what the actual tax bill is. So the CLA, relative to the percentage of what your tax bill increases, it means absolutely nothing. It means absolutely nothing. And at the end of the day, from an equity perspective, what we've done is treat most communities in a similar manner by giving almost all of them double-digit tax increases in a single year. And I just don't think that's reasonable. And I don't believe that most Vermonters do either.
Could I just say one thing real quick, Richard?
Quick.
I just want to remind folks that our community passed a school budget after the school board.
Albeit fairly narrowly, but it did pass.
It did pass.
Although it was easily the closest vote on that budget in years.
Yeah, but I think that this is in a time of where the school board and the administrators and school staff are facing unprecedented pressure in 1 year on the school budget, like a 16% increase in healthcare.
Your father, one of those local school board members, of course, right?
Yeah, and a multiple decade school administrator with a ton of experience helping school boards save money. And I think if you ask him and other school board members, they worked really hard to cut the school budget as much as possible from its initial proposal without hurting kids. And I just really want to stay focused on, yes, no one likes tax increases, but I voted for a bill to fund the school budget that our district passed at the lowest property tax rate that I thought we could get. And that is the kind of work that isn't always easy, but I'm never going to act like there are magical solutions to these problems year over year. I'm thinking more long-term about how we protect what we need for our kids and fund the things that we need for our community. And that's the kind of representative I'll be if I'm reelected.
Okay, let's move on. Another huge issue, which I hardly have to tell you folks, I'm sure you hear about it every day, public safety concerns. Another huge issue. Interviewed Mayor Tim Smith a week or two ago, and Mayor's usually a pretty upbeat guy. He was, at times he was even seemed a little downbeat, just very concerned about public safety. Homeless issues come to mind. Joe, you're running into that. Is that on just a lot of voters' minds?
Absolutely.
A lot of concern?
Absolutely. Affordability and public safety are
Sounds like the two biggies.
number 1 and 2, or 2 and 1, depending on who you speak with.
Yeah.
And with very little exception, I hardly heard any other issues.
So what do you tell folks? We're St. Albans City PD starting July 1st, start covering St. Albans town again. So what do you tell folks? I mean, it's
Well, to begin with, what are we observing in our community?
Yeah.
What are we observing? We're observing drug use openly during the day. Hard drug use. We are observing drug dealing on the streets during the day. I personally observed that 6 feet away from me, in front of Martha's Kitchen, within the past month, when I was having a conversation with Bob down there. There's a lack of accountability when the PD goes out, does their job. There's a lot of property crime, all kinds of it's rampant, and people are very concerned. And I think if you really look at it, there needs to be consequences for bad behavior, for breaking the law. And right now there's not, for the most part, and that's not. It's something that local law enforcement can deal with. There's a young lady who robbed or attempted to rob Twig's restaurant on North Main Street earlier this year. I think her last name is Royer, but that part doesn't matter. And she's been picked up and arrested dozens of times at St. Albans City PD. To point, the day the museum opened on Church Street this year, she stole our donation bucket within a couple hours of the interaction at Twig's. And so why was she not held? Why was she not held? And this was not her first interaction. And a lot of that is legislative. I think that bail reform needs to be looked at again. And a lot of these repeat offenders just They need to be held accountable. And then you have to reflect on why are these folks on the street? Substance abuse, rehab, and mental health services really need more resources in the state of Vermont.
Mike, about 300 people attended the Public Safety Forum, including myself, for attending a rare meeting. You're one of the speakers here, and I think you're going to tell us the legislature did make some changes, but is there a lot more to be done? It sounds like we still have huge issues here.
So there's a number of things. So first of all, we made a whole number of changes. The first of those was S195, which did roll back the 2018 bail reform and lifted the $200 cap on bail. I got to sit in court with a neighbor and the mayor and the city manager a couple weeks ago when a woman who had, been breaking into cars in my neighborhood, our neighborhood, who, had 13 charges pending. And because of that law that was cited by our state's attorney in court that I helped pass, S195, he was able to get a high enough bail that she would be held. Now, why can't we just hold everybody that commits a crime in jail pending their trial? Well, in Vermont, the Constitution has been interpreted by the Supreme Court to say we only can really use bail to compel people to appear. So if we feel like they're a flight risk or they're not going to show up at court, that's what we can use bail for. What we really need is to invest in the courts and our prosecutors so that they can deal with the case backlog and get these cases resolved, right? And so the investment that we just made in this budget that's now hiring more prosecutors, hiring more court staff, hiring 3 more judges, that wasn't in the governor's budget. That was people like me and Representative Martin Lalonde, who's my fellow chair on House Judiciary, recognizing that we were horribly underfunding the judiciary given the crime and the things that we were seeing in our community. So the legislature has really started to respond in a big way. There's of course more to do, but I have always supported investing in law enforcement when I was on the city council and professionalizing the St. Albans Police Department. This community voted when I was on the city council, we put a measure on the ballot to add 1 more embedded social worker so that we have some of those mental health professionals embedded with the police.
The street crimes unit, I believe, is back with us.
I just met with the chief and Ben Kuchar, the lieutenant there, to talk about work that they need with the state's attorney. I think there's some things we can do in the legislature to help them more easily be able to bust up drug dealers by changing some of the laws around the way that warrants are provided and making it faster for them to be able to get those while still protecting people's constitutional rights about search and seizure.
But there's
a lot of work to be done.
And there's a lot of concern out there. I mean, you run into people. I mean, are people afraid to just go out at night now? I mean, has it gotten to that point?
So I think that the vast majority of the crimes that we're seeing are people who are trying to steal things in order to get the money that they need in order to satisfy the addiction that they have. Substance use disorder is a huge issue, and the particular drugs that are on the street right now are worse than what we saw in the last wave of opiates when we were able to treat a lot of those with medically assisted therapies. Fentanyl doesn't respond to the same kind of medical treatments, so outpatient is tough. One of the things that I want to invest in with, frankly, our state economy is doing pretty well, and I think one of the priorities for some of the additional corporate income tax revenues that we're seeing come in ahead of projections would be for us to have Medicaid pay for longer than 14 days and also to stand up more supportive recovery housing so that people that are coming out of that kind of initial detox when they do get treatment have a step down where they have some supported services, supervision, and some help. And we've seen that model work in places like New Hampshire. We don't have a lot of those beds here in most of our communities. And so that's something that I want to work on when we get down to the legislatures to fill in that gap. I think that there's 2 things going on. There are very real crimes happening. My car got broken into, right?
I've had my car rifled through myself.
But very, very few of them are violent, and the violent crimes that we have seen are particularly domestic violence or a couple of people who are, in the drug trade themselves. We haven't seen a lot of violent crime related to this. So I want people to be cautious and concerned, but not panicked. What I am worried about, and I'll have this be the last thing I say on this, is I want to echo what the chief of police, Maurice Lamar, said at a meeting a couple of weeks ago at the city council. We need people to really report things, but not act as vigilantes. I have heard some people, especially on social media, talk about, pulling guns out and shooting people. And I understand why people are frustrated, but what the state's attorney is doing right now with the police, we're already starting to see higher bail amounts, people getting taken off the street. Some of the legislation we passed is really working now. And I realize it's happening later than most of us would like. But I don't want people to take matters into their own hands and hurt an innocent person or themselves.
So you think the legislature made some changes? Do you think that's doing any good or will do some good, or is it just a whole lot more to do? Or
Well, I mean, I think it's good that the legislature recognized that they've made some errors. Certainly, if you were to speak with any number of people in the community, I think there'd almost be universal concurrence that St. Albans City is less safe than it was 2 years ago. But I think that what's happened is just not adequate relative to what's happening on the street. We've essentially decriminalized open air drug use. I mean, there's no penalty for it, so that although it hasn't been by law decriminalized, it's permitted. It's a permitted thing to do, and I just don't think that's okay.
mentioned before the show, I'll let you ask Rep. McCarthy a question. Any question you want. And I'll give Mike the same opportunity to ask you a question. Want me to go to Mike first?
If you could, I'd appreciate that.
That's fine. Mike, and you don't have to do this, but have you got a question for Joe?
Yeah, I've heard Joe a couple of times, and in some of the materials that I've seen his campaign put out, talk about capping school funding. He says capping property taxes, but that's how we fund our schools. I wanted to know, how are you going to invest in things like mental health services, drug treatment, if we already are seeing inflationary pressures across state government and in our schools? How are you going to fund those things? And do you have a different financing mechanism? Is there a specific policy proposal that you're out there talking about that would make up the difference? Like, what would you do differently?
Well, I believe that property taxes do need to be capped. And as I've alluded to, if a district wants to spend beyond whatever that cap may be, that should be raised by that school district and not on a statewide basis.
So do you like the foundation formula?
Well, do I get to answer the question, or do you just retort why I'm answering? That's
Let
not.
Joe answer.
And beyond that, if you look at substance abuse and mental health services, I really think that has a symbiotic relationship with the Department of Corrections. There's an interaction there, and that's certainly not the only one, but that I would certainly want folks from that department in the conversation is just so we can get the most values. At the end of the day, you've got a lot of folks who are on the street who need help and who are committing a lot of these crimes. And there are people of such an age that they could and should be contributing members of the community, and they're not. And they're not. And we need to get them to where they can be.
You got any question you want to ask Mike?
So, Mike, we've talked about it. Property taxes in St. Albans City have increased over 20% in the last 2 years. The legislature has also increased the property transfer tax. How do those two facts coincide with affordable housing?
So the property transfer tax is a big part of how we fund the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board and have invested in new units. Very proud to take the rap for helping us see hundreds of new units in development in the city of St. Albans, whether that's at the new Fonda redevelopment site, work we started when I was on the city council that the state is helping to support. So great to go to the opening of the 55 and up, the senior living project at Reed Commons that Cathedral Square is doing right there on Lower Newton Street. I think that when we talk about the future of how we fund things, it's about making sure that Vermont continues to move in the direction of getting away from the property tax as a straight tax and onto the income tax. And something that was interesting about this sort of vague policy proposal about capping property taxes is that we already do that for the vast majority of households. And, if you're a lower moderate income person, the amount of education property tax that you pay is capped as a small percentage of your income between 1% and 2%. And on a kind of a progressive scale. Now, there are some cliffs there. You make a little bit over that, and all of a sudden your property tax bill can jump. And that's something that we're going to need to continue to work on. And I think the foundation formula that we put into H887 that'll go into effect for the next couple of years actually accomplishes what Joe's talking about. We're already, I'm glad to hear him kind of endorse the concept of that idea, because we already have recognized that we can't just allow some districts to totally overspend and not feel any of that cost at the local level. But yeah, I think that we need to get on a more sustainable path. This was a really tough year. And we did the best we could, but while laying the groundwork with things like that foundation formula and the commission for a more affordable future. But at the end of the day, my fundamental value when it comes to this is about making sure that our education system serves our kids better. And we've got a lot of work to do there.
I want to get to an issue related to public safety. I think I asked you folks the same question 2 years ago. Homelessness, the unhoused population, which certainly factors into crime issues in some cases. I think I asked you the same question 2 years ago. Should it be a state responsibility, Joe, to deal with the state's unhoused population? I mean, it sounds like the legislature has really struggled with this, with, X number of people getting, motel rooms, but, limits, caps end. Anyway, that sounds like a very tough issue, but should you tell me you're happy with what the state's been doing about this, what the legislature's been doing, and the governor?
I don't think that can be a municipal issue. For various reasons. It's not good for all parties, or any parties, for there to be a market homeless population in any communities. Now, to speak with, directors of shelters and other places, there are a certain number of people who just aren't going to be sheltered because they don't want to be. But I think that that's an exception to the rule. As far as how we're doing that, the hotel voucher program is a Band-Aid. It obviously is not, that's not a long-term solution. So then you have to ask yourself, what are the needs and what can we afford? And maybe there's a congregate housing model that may lend itself to being more reasonable in getting a roof over folks' heads. But to just have scads of people on the street, that's not useful for anyone. So we saw there was a homeless encampment by Food City down on Lake Street that was dismantled this year. And when you do that, those people that were living there,
they're going somewhere.
They're not disappearing, right? So that took care of the issue for that particular shopping center, which was on the precipice of having its business closed due to this rampant crime. But it doesn't solve the comprehensive issue.
Mike, the legislature sounds like it's really struggled. I mean, it's a tough issue. Sounds like of the issues I think of with the legislature dealing with, sounds like it's been a very difficult issue.
Yeah, the
Are you
fundamentals
happy with
of
what the legislature's done about this?
No, and I think that we really had a huge disagreement around how to wind down the motel program, because while it's not a long-term solution, there are hundreds of families and households that are basically being turned out of hotels with really nowhere to go. I think that'll exacerbate some of the both encampment issues and the vulnerability that creates for those folks. So the House wanted to have more of a thoughtful wind down and kept going to the Department of Children and Families and saying, can you case manage these folks? And the governor stood up at press conferences during the spring when we were working on this and basically said, he used this phrase, a lot of these folks will self-resolve, that they'll go to family or they'll go somewhere. Well, what we're seeing right now in a lot of the state is they are just camping or handing out tents to folks, and there was not a thoughtful plan from the administration to wind this thing down. So the legislature didn't have a lot of great options. We did end up supporting investing more in long-term permanently affordable housing than we did in the GA emergency housing program. But we also invested in some things that are really going to help right here in the community, like putting the seed money in for a new youth and transition shelter that Spectrum Youth and Family Services is looking for a spot for right now. That'll probably be stood up next year. So that seed money was something that was in this year's budget that I'm proud of. That'll help kids, really, youth that are transitioning into adulthood that don't have safe housing transition. So there are a lot of small ways like that we're helping to take a bite out of this problem. But the fundamental thing that we know is that if you have places where you have rising rents and rising property values, people buying houses sight unseen, very happy that our nice community in the revitalized downtown and businesses and everything and sidewalks has attracted people from all over the country to live here. I've got neighbors that have come from Florida, neighbors from Texas that have moved here in the last couple of years that I'm meeting as I go door to door. But what that does is it makes it so that we don't have affordable housing. Some of the people who are homeless and living in tents right now, they have full-time jobs and they just can't find an affordable place for themselves to live. I mean, this is what we're facing right now. And I want to make sure we don't conflate the drug and crime issue with housing and homelessness. There is some overlap in terms of the people who are on the street that are causing some of the crime and doing things that are detrimental to the community. But just being homeless is not a crime. It's a crime in our society, as rich as we are in a lot of ways, that we have not figured out how to have an affordable, decent place for everybody to live. And that is something that I think the state can't take on all at once, but needs to take more responsibility for.
Another tough issue out there. Healthcare. This Green Mountain Care Board, I guess, just signed up a consultant a while back. And there's a quote from that consultant. Unless immediate decisive action is taken to transform Vermont's healthcare system, it will be financially unsustainable by 2030. There's the word unsustainable again. And I read the Chronicle, a very good weekly paper out of Orleans County, and the folks in Newport, the mayor there, Linda Joy Sullivan, I think, kind of freaking out. I guess the consultant suggested that North Country Hospital in Newport maybe be turned into a mental health care facility, or just, with way fewer services than they have now. So you can imagine the Newport folks. And I'm not sure there was a recommendation with NMC, but Joe, any thoughts on that? Have you got a concern about the future of our own Northwestern Medical Center?
Well,
another big issue.
Well, Richard, if I may, I have opened on each point thus far, so I think that Mike should have an opportunity to do so.
Okay, Mike.
So big report came out from a consultant.
And did they mention NMC as they did North Country Hospital?
They did, but there were really 4 other hospitals that had the biggest changes.
Not NMC.
No, not in the kind of really stark ways that like Gifford or Springfield, where they're basically closing up most of their hospital services and turning them into urgent care.
Randolph, right.
So this is very analogous to the education situation. So you have a statewide consultant can look and say, hey, if you really want to cut spending and not have these big cost pressures, which frankly are part of what's driving up the education property tax, we have a lot of specialized services, emergency rooms throughout the state for as small a population as we are in order to have geographic accessibility. And what our hospital has done really brilliantly is partner with UVM, make sure that we've got the things we really need here and that we can deliver those at a pretty low cost in terms of their census. And so we're not the target as much as some of those other hospitals are, like we are seeing in Newport. I think Mayor Sullivan's comment was something like, leave us alone. Yeah. Well, that's what a lot of school districts are doing too, right? They're saying to the state, leave us alone, just let us do our thing. The problem is if we're all paying for it, we all need to be a part of figuring out what is the appropriate and the affordable place to provide each of these services. And doing the right thing for the state is going to be really hard for some communities. And I think more hospitals could follow the model that we did, where we used to have some specializations here and some services that you could get here that we're now sending people down to UVM for, but with support from their local primary care provider or somebody here locally. So we've kind of got the best of both worlds in large part.
So you're feeling reasonably optimistic about the future of the Northwestern Medical Center at this point, or?
Reasonably optimistic because the leadership there and the successive past few boards and CEOs has really had a mind toward the future and was looking at these problems and didn't just stick their head in the sand, which some of these communities, frankly, their hospitals have just been operating status quo and not looking at the changing economics of providing healthcare in a rural environment, and also some of the opportunities for collaboration with the bigger, what this report says is that we should have the bigger hospitals be centers of excellence and then have appropriate levels of services that are more secondary or primary outside of the UVMs and the Dartmouths, right? And so, we're well positioned to be in that kind of middle space here at Northwestern Medical Center. From what I read into the future that report outlines, there will probably be some tough asks. There may be some things that we want to provide up here that we won't be able to anymore in the future, but those are things that I think we just all need to take a really good hard look at. With healthcare, are we providing the right services in the right places for the right price? And with education, adults in communities are tied up with, we need to have really tiny class sizes. We need to have this building that I went to school in be the building my kid goes to school in. And I think we need to think about patients and children and actual good quality services as opposed to just the way it's always been. And that's going to be, it's going to require relationships and experience and leadership that can say hard things to people and actually find consensus, because you can't just go down and say, I want it this way in the legislature. You have to build coalitions to get things passed.
Joe, your feeling, have you got a decent feeling for the future of NMC, Joe? Your thoughts on another big issue?
I have, but just to back up just a little bit regarding homelessness and crime and the correlation thereof. Chief Lamont at the most recent St. Albans City Public Safety meeting testified that of the 15 most frequently encountered individuals in St. Albans City Police Department, that 14 of them are unsheltered. So I would argue there's a very strong relationship between those two things. But the Northwest Medical Center, I believe, was just approved for an increase of a little less than 4%, which put it somewhere in the median of other hospitals. Looks like the hospital in Burlington actually got a rate decrease this year. But a lot of the foundations of what makes a Northwest Medical Center or any other entity feasible is being able to attract staff. And I think a bedrock, a foundation of a lot of our issues is their availability to affordable housing and just housing in general. So that's the challenge for those running Northwest or any other entity. Ultimately, cost drivers are going to create scenarios where there are certain services that you used to see in St. Albans or you used to see in Newport or you used to see at Copley that may not exist anymore and may need to happen in Burlington. And that doesn't necessarily also need to be concentrated in the greater Burlington area. My mom had a knee operation, a replacement done at Copley, because that's, that
Sounds like they're very good at that.
that's their gig, and it went well. The only the downside to that is I can't hide upstairs in my office from her anymore because she has mobility to get up there and find me. But sure, there are going to be things that look different, and they have to look different. No different than the medical field. It only loosely resembles what it did decades ago. I used to go to the pediatrician's office at Mousetrap with Chip and Ellie and Fred Holmes in a converted house on Fairfield Street, and that's just, you don't see that anymore.
Another big issue is we're getting down to about 7 minutes left. Again, Democratic supermajority certainly taking some hits on the clean heat standard issue and the costs, and that's an issue legislature will be dealing with in January. Mike's, have you got a position? I know Guy Page of Vermont Chronicle, I guess, was trying to get answers from all legislators whether they would be supporting this again in January, hearing different things on that, but huge concern about the potential price tag on that. Can you get into that concisely?
I think what's fascinating to me about this is when we saw just a year ago, in 1 year, the doubling of number 2 heating oil prices from about $3.20 to well over $5 in 1 year, that anybody would be mad at the legislature for looking at how do we help Vermonters who are on propane and heating oil kind of get off the price roller coaster. With the kind of efficiency utility model that we use right now for most of us in the city are on natural gas. pay a small efficiency fee. We have a regulated utility that has really stable pricing that helps pay for, I actually need a new furnace right now. It's going to save me money to buy a new furnace. It's going to save me money each winter to buy a new furnace. That's what's going to happen. And that kind of model isn't available to people in more rural parts of the state that are stuck on heating oil and propane. Now, there are lots of different clean heat solutions that are being considered in this model. The early report, had these eye-popping numbers because it was looking at what would it take to get everybody to get all the maximum incentive to switch all the fuels over all across the state at homes and businesses by 2050. We spend over $1 billion with a B dollars a year on heating fuels in businesses and houses across Vermont every year. So of course, over a 25-year time span, you're going to be looking at more than $10 billion if you did all that through investment. I think most of that actually can happen in the private market. And then what the legislature will actually end up doing by setting a clean heat standard is bringing oil, propane, kerosene, these volatile fuels that are unregulated right now into the regulated market, having the Public Utility Commission back up the public and have some kind of price and rate control on that so there's some stability, and then build in a small efficiency fee to reinvest in helping people switch over to pellet fuel, heat pumps, do weatherization projects, because that'll lower the cost for people over time dramatically. We know that.
So have you got an open mind on how you're going to be dealing with this?
Yeah, I think right now what we're looking at is
Can I just mention a sentence? Sorry, from these are the ads I've been seeing from the Paid for by Vermonters for Affordable Heat. And just, and again, they say enough is enough, but they start their ad, according to a taxpayer-funded study, the Vermont Clean Heat Standard will cost $17.3 billion. So that's a price tag you're obviously questioning a bit.
Yeah, because that's what they were asked to do is figure out if.
But you'll get some hard numbers in January. The legislature will, presumably.
Yeah, and I don't think we'll do everything that the study considered all at once, right? Mm. So it's the idea that we want to create a mechanism very similar to what we've done to keep electricity rates in line, very similar to what we do with natural gas. Those are both regulated utilities that we pay, and we have price stability because of that. Those are the kinds of things that we're really considering. And when I think about the folks who are paying for ads like that, you're literally talking about one of the Koch brothers in Americans for Prosperity that are, for political reasons, and I understand it's the silly season, campaigns, are out there trying to scare Vermonters. And all we're trying to do in the legislature is say, Vermonters can't afford to stay on heating oil and kerosene and continue to just pump gallons and gallons and gallons and gallons at $5 a gallon into leaky old homes. We want to help people weatherize and get off those fuels because there are new technologies available and there's ways for them to be more efficient that are going to keep people healthier, happier in their homes, more comfortable, and at a lower cost.
So, clean heat standard, again, that's Democratic supermajority getting a lot of criticism about that, and we're getting pretty tight on time here.
I would be very curious what kind of tax you would support on propane and heating oil, Mike.
Well, it would certainly have to be less than some of the rather absurd amounts. But right now, we pay less than 10% of every kilowatt hour that we spend on electricity goes into our efficiency programs. And I think something that was kind of in line with that would be reasonable. And when you see prices going up by 80 or 100% year over year with fuels, then it's sort of like the legislature is not going to be driving the cost of the fuels. I trust the Public Utility Commission to be responsible on behalf of Vermonters more than I do the people who want to keep people just filling their tank year after year after year.
Sure.
Any more quick comment on that?
Well, Vermont Gas is regulated because it's a monopoly. The fuel and propane dealers are not regulated because they're not a monopoly. So that's the distinction. I have a building that is heated by propane. And it doesn't go up 100% a year. Granted, the prices are much more volatile than a regulated thing like natural gas is. But to propose yet another tax for rural Vermonters in an environment where we've already seen unprecedented tax increases, it's just not reasonable.
And that'll lead me into, we got about a minute left here. I'll let you have a quick closing statement here, Joe. Why are you the person to send him up here?
Well, we've spoken for about an hour now, and certainly over the last 2 years, St. Albans, Vermont has become less affordable. it's become less safe. And poor decisions in Montpelier have a lot to do with that. So I think to send someone back to Montpelier to correct their own mistakes is not in the best interest of St. Albans City and Franklin-3. And subsequently, I think I'm the better choice. And I would partner with Governor Scott and not be adversarial to him.
Mike, have you half a minute here? You'd like to go back to Montpelier?
I would. What I'm hearing at the doors are concerns about some of these issues that we've talked about: public safety, housing, homelessness. But what I hear the most is that people are looking for a candidate who is going to offer solutions to those problems, who's in the trenches, rolling up their sleeves and saying, what can I do and what can I convince people from across the state who also serve in the legislature to do to tackle some of these issues. When we talk about...
Just need to wrap it up very quickly.
Yeah,
please.
so I'm hoping that folks will take a look at my 2024 voter guide if they want to know more, and visit my website, ilikemikevt.com, and I'll see you out there on the campaign trail. I would really appreciate your vote.
Okay, that's going to do it. Thanks to Democratic Rep Mike McCarthy and Republican Challenger Joe Luneau. Thanks for the time, folks.
Thank
We
you,
covered
Richard.
a lot of
Thank you,
ground.
Richard.
Thanks to producer Alan Cunningham. And thanks for watching us here on Northwest Access TV. We'll see you next time.